Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Bert Vandenbroucke, and together with my supervisor Vandenbroucke and my colleague Robert Verbeke, I make up the Dwarf Galaxy group. So we study dwarf galaxies. Let me explain what dwarf galaxies are. For this, we have to zoom out a little bit. So we all know our planet Earth, which is one of 8 planets circling our sun. And our sun is just one of many billion stars in the disk of a giant galaxy called the Milky Way. So we're about here somewhere. So if you zoom out a bit more, you see that the Milky Way is a part of a small group of galaxies called the local group. So the Milky Way is over here. And in this local group, you have the Milky Way, you have another large galaxy, Andromeda, and you have a lot of very small, faint galaxies, which are orders of magnitude fainter and lighter in mass than the other two, the big ones. And these galaxies are dwarf galaxies. So you see that most of these dwarf galaxies are actually satellite galaxies of the Milky Way or Andromeda, but you also have isolated dwarf galaxies. So why do we study these dwarf galaxies? So if you zoom out a little bit more, you can zoom out to the entire observable universe as we can see it. So the diameter of this observable universe is about 92 billion light years, which is a huge distance. And you see that the structure inside this huge cube is quite regular. So there's structure everywhere, but it's not that in some part of the universe structure is more concentrated than in other parts. It's homogeneous throughout the universe. So we want to explain how this universe, as we know it, as we can observe it, how it came to be. We have a pretty good idea of what happened. So 13.8 billion years ago, an event called the Big Bang took place. And during this event, the universe, well, before this event, the universe was very dense and hot. And then suddenly it started expanding. And while it was expanding, structure inside the universe collapsed to form these galaxy structures and stars and stuff we see today. So it's basically very simple in the beginning. You have matter, which is quite homogeneous and which starts collapsing under the force of gravity in an expanding universe. We can simulate this on computers, this process, and look at how the universe would look like today. And then you get something like this. So the length scale indicated here corresponds to roughly 1.5 billion light years, which is still not 92 of our whole universe, but it's a considerable fraction. And you see that this structure looks a bit like the observable universe. In fact, we can do statistics on this sample of halos compared to the observed halos, and then you see that they match pretty well. One of the problems with this is that in order to make this work, we have to make assumptions about the matter and energy contents of our universe. And a very important assumption is that only 5%, this blue slice, of all matter in the universe is ordinary matter as we know it, in the form of stars, gas, planets, everything we know as ordinary matter. The largest part of the energy and matter in our universe in the form of very mysterious dark energy, this 68%. We don't know anything about dark energy. The only thing we know is we need dark energy to explain the expansion of our universe, which is accelerating. Another 27% of matter in our universe is in the form of this dark matter, this red component, and that's what we want to study. So dark matter only interacts through gravity. That's why it's called dark. It doesn't interact with light or electromagnetism, and we can't see it. But you can't see its effect on other matter because it has a gravitational interaction with it. So one of the questions we ask is does this dark matter interact only through gravity, in which case it would be cold dark matter, or does it interact with itself through any other force that we don't know, in which case it would be self-interacting dark matter. Now, we can already exclude heavily self-interacting dark matter, because if this would be the case, then the self-interaction of this dark matter would influence a large-scale structure of our universe. And we saw before that it matched pretty well in our simulations. But it could be weakly interacting dark matter. So it could be that on very small scales, the behavior of dark matter is not what it would be if dark matter only interacted gravitationally. But to see this effect, you have to study very small halos and very small scales. And that's where the dwarf galaxies come in. So what we want to do is we want to simulate these dwarf galaxies inside our own local group and make very good high-resolution predictions for what they should look like under cold dark matter, under weakly interacting dark matter, and compare these models with actual observations. The problem is, to do this kind of modeling, you need very detailed simulations. You need to include baryonic effects, and you need to include these two massive galaxies on our local group. So what are these baryonic effects? At the start of the universe, all ordinary matter is in the form of gas, this blue gas. This blue gas collapses under gravity. While it collapses, it becomes denser in the center, and when gas becomes denser, the pressure inside the gas will try to pull it apart again. So you get an interaction between gravitational pull at the one hand and the pressure that pushes it away again. But this gas is not just gas in an ideal way, but it consists of atoms and molecules, and these atoms and molecules will interact and will emit radiation. And this radiation will effectively make the gas cool down and lose energy. So when the gas loses energy, temperature will drop, pressure will drop, and the gravitational pull can at some point overcome the outward pushing pressure. And in some parts of the gas, you can get very, very dense clumps that start to collapse even more until a star is formed in these very dense clumps. So you get stars. These stars will emit radiation, and this radiation in turn will heat the gas again. And if it's very massive stars, these stars will be short-lived and will explode as massive supernova explosions, which will put a lot of energy and a lot of matter back into this gas. So this complex cycle of star formation does need to be taken into account in our simulations to be detailed enough to model these dwarf galaxies. Then if you take one of our dwarf galaxies over here and make it orbit a large galaxy like Andromeda, you also have to take into account the effect of Andromeda on our galaxy. So there will be a large gravitational pull from Andromeda, which can affect the structure of our halo. We also have radiation coming out of Andromeda, which might heat the gas inside the halo. And Andromeda is surrounded by a very hot intergalactic medium, which can also exert pressure on your galaxy. So we also need to take this into account in our simulations. So in the end, what we want to do is combine a very detailed simulation of both our dwarf galaxy and Milky Way and Andromeda. And I combine that with very detailed models and with a very accurate hydrodynamical simulation code. And that's where my research kicks in. So during my PhD, I've written this code, ShadowFacts, which is a very accurate hydrodynamical simulation code that will be used in the future to run this project. So to demonstrate ShadowFacts, so what ShadowFacts does is this is your simulation box. It divides it up into irregular shaped cells called Voronoi cells. And these cells move along with the hydrodynamical fluid inside the box. So if we let a gas cloud collapse under its own gravity, you can see these cells first go to the center, and then when the collapsing cloud bounces back in the center, you see the cells move outward again, together with the gas. So one of the big advantages of this technique is that since the grid is moving along with your flow, you get resolution where you need it, in the parts of the fluid where it's interesting to look at. So in 2D, you can see how these cells rotate together with the instabilities that are formed in this gas. So this technique will help us to get the resolution in our simulations where it should be, making the simulations computationally feasible, while at the same time also achieving very high resolutions. So this code ShadowFacts has been made public. We're still working very hard to include all the baryonic effects I talked about in this code, and we hope to use it for actual simulations of dwarf galaxies in the near future. I thank you for your attention.
Questions?